When you look at these three examples, you cannot but realize that history is potentially enormously powerful. And the reason why we are so powerless and anxious about world events today is precisely because we've lost that power. Hi folks, Mr. Powell here with Knowable World. It's the first in a series that we're going to entitle History Moment with Mr. Powell. And this is where I'm going to take the opportunity to discuss what I consider to be very important topics, sometimes theoretical topics that have to do with the state of history today and what we're trying to do about it at Knowable World. So today's going to be the first of three videos that I intend to record on the subject, where did the power of history go? So I've written a newsletter on this topic, and that's where I'm taking this content, but I also intend to just kind of riff a little bit on this as I go, just with some spontaneous thoughts that I want to add along the way. But if you are not subscribed to the Knowable World newsletter, then please make your way to knowableworld.com and get on that letter. And you can visit the blog as well, where you'll find this in written form. But for those of you that enjoy more of a video presentation of this style, I'm happy to have you here. Please subscribe to the channel. So the problem is, how many of us feel today that history is powerful? In other words, that knowledge of history is power. I think most people, and rightly so, unfortunately, given the state of history, don't feel that way. Because what is history today? It's a never-ending cacophony of arguments. And even the better history, if there is such a thing, is mainly a dry collection of facts. So where is the insight, the inspiration, and the instruction? I call those the three I's. Where are they? Right? Why are we not getting what we should be getting from this subject? History is a powerful, potentially a powerful subject. And all we have to do to grasp that and understand that and then apply that is use the power of history to see. So in this series, I'm going to be talking about three episodes in history that demonstrate the potential power of history overwhelmingly. These are the three greatest episodes in the cultural history of Western civilization. The first is the birth of history in ancient Greece and the impulse it gave to Western civilization. The second is the rebirth of historical mindedness in European culture during the Renaissance and the impulse that it gave to the revival of the Western tradition. And the third is the deployment of history by America's founding fathers and the empowerment they obtained from it to create the greatest country in the history of the world. When you look at these three examples, you cannot but realize that history is potentially enormously powerful. And the reason why we are so powerless and anxious about world events today is precisely because we've lost that power. So today I want to talk about the first of these three seminal cases, the case of ancient Greece. The fathers of history are widely acknowledged to be Herodotus and Thucydides, both of ancient Athens. Herodotus, originally from Halicarnassus, which is in the Ionian region of Greece, settled in Athens during the time of the Persian Wars, the defining conflict of that age when the fate of nascent Western civilization was in the balance. The Persian Empire, the largest in the history of the world up to that point, was bearing down on Greece with the weight of perhaps 2 million men. The Greeks, a ragtag collection of city-states, usually at war with each other, had banded together to fight their common enemy. Naturally, the bulk of Greece's cultural capital was dedicated to the fight, but among the amazing facts about the Greeks, later celebrated by Pericles in his wonderful funeral oration, is that war never fully absorbed their creative powers. They continued to be dedicated to higher ideals, even when loaded down with the burdens of war. Herodotus, among the Greeks already dedicated to natural science, art, literature, philosophy, and so on, set himself to the task of defining a new kind of inquiry. His goal, as he stated it, was to understand the world we live in. Here is the opening passage of his famous history. Here are presented the results of the inquiry carried out by Herodotus of Halicarnassus. The purpose is to prevent the traces of human events from being erased by time, and to preserve the fame of the important and remarkable achievements produced by both Greeks and non-Greeks. Among the matters covered is, in particular, the cause of the hostilities between the Greeks and non-Greeks. As you can see, Herodotus was interested in understanding the cause of the great war that was racking his civilization. To do that, he wanted to understand the remarkable achievements of the Greeks and non-Greeks alike. He wasn't interested in claiming that the Persian invasion was unprovoked. He wasn't interested in claiming that the Persian Emperor Darius or Xerxes were dictators without a legitimate mandate. Yeah, you're kind of getting the reference there. He wasn't interested in winning a social media spat. He was interested in the truth. Herodotus traveled the Mediterranean world, visiting other cultures to understand who they were. He wanted to know them so that he could achieve a value that we emphasize at Noble World called historical empathy. Historical empathy is the ability to put yourself in someone else's shoes when studying history. It does not mean that you agree with them. It does not mean that you sympathize with them. It means that you strive to understand them as a fellow human being carrying the weight of history. When we study the history of slavery in America or elsewhere, for instance, it is crucial to practice historical empathy. We have to understand the normalcy of slavery in the world of earlier times, while simultaneously condemning it from our modern vantage point. It's a delicate balance. It's sometimes necessary to make excuses for slavery when studying it. When people practiced debt slavery in ancient Athens, for instance, we have to understand what the socioeconomic conditions were that justified the practice. We have to understand why even the aristocracy could not afford to simply give up its wealth altruistically to the commoners, and why the penalty of servitude was imposed when debt obligations had to be enforced. While we admire Solon for abolishing this institution from a purely theoretical moral perspective, this insight allows us to grasp why political instability continued to plague Athens after the abolition of debt slavery, and why such instability continued despite the establishment of democracy. There simply wasn't enough food, ever, before the Industrial Revolution. In colonial America, we are inclined to be a little less generous. It pains us to see Americans enslaving people from Africa, and especially to ponder the inhumanity of the transatlantic slave trade. But historical empathy demands that we challenge ourselves to face the realization we would have done it too. We shouldn't simply pride ourselves in knowing better today, because we were born in a time of plenty and a society that has embraced civil rights. The truth is, we are lucky. We didn't earn that. The people who practiced slavery and who fought amongst themselves over it gave that to us. We don't have to imagine the struggle within those people. History teaches us that 1 million Americans died fighting each other over it. Herodotus was the first person to recognize the power of history, and he deployed it for the first time in what has since become acknowledged as a brilliant, though necessarily flawed, inquiry. There was no way, there was no science of history from which he could extract known methods and procedures. He had to invent them. He did not always succeed. But in the main, he was a genius, and we would not be here if it weren't for him. Nor would the study of history have advanced without the contribution of Thucydides, also an Athenian. Thucydides was alive in the later period of the Peloponnesian War, the war between Athens and Sparta that ultimately ruined Greece. Opening his history on that terrible episode, Thucydides wrote that he wished to provide for, quote, inquirers who desire an exact knowledge of the past as an aid to understanding the future, which in the course of human things must resemble it if it does not reflect it, unquote. This is a very important idea. Sometimes people say, those who do not remember the past are condemned to repeat it. That's a pretty famous quote. But what Thucydides was saying is that the future will resemble the past, or reflect the past, not merely when we fail to learn from it, but because human beings are human beings. Human nature is what it is. Are we still fighting wars like the Greeks did? Yes. Are we still trying to invent things like the Greeks did? Yes. Are we still trying to study history like the Greeks taught us? Thankfully, yes. Because we're all human beings trying to understand the world we live in. We can all thank Herodotus and Thucydides for teaching us how to do that. And if we keep going together, we can learn amazing things. It won't be easy. The subject of history has unraveled in modern times. There's a cacophony of warring voices today from which it is very difficult to extract any meaning. But the power of history will always be available to us if we pick up the worn-out tools the ancient Greeks gave us. When they used them for the very first time, it gave them a power that had never been seen before. It fueled the very birth of Western civilization during the Athenian Golden Age, of which we are all inheritors. At Noble World, we are dedicated to the proposition that the true power of history is always available to us, and we are using it to help a growing community of homeschoolers every day. Our mission is to be the best place for you to give your child that power. Let me know how you think we're doing. I'll be back in episode 2 of History Moment. Hope to see you there.